I got a question from one of our listeners asking if I knew anything about natural treatments for post-traumatic stress disorder. This fellow has a really good friend who has post-traumatic stress disorder, and he has seemingly lost his family and was discharged from the service for having a really bad case of it. The military's response seems to be to let these guys drink themselves into a stupor, and that's their way of dealing with it because they don't have any way of dealing with post-traumatic stress. Let me read you what my answer was to this fellow. On the subject of PTSD, if we read back into the doings of any post-war society, veterans have had this syndrome in spades. I've read about U.S. Civil War vets and their post-war lives, as well as remember the guys who came back from Nam with this affliction. That I know of, no one has yet to come up with a viable treatment, allopathic, natural, or otherwise, for PTSD. Civil War vets availed themselves of the cocaine and opiates that were freely available until the founding of the FDA in 1913. World War I and II vets took to drink, and I remember the alcoholic, quote, bums in New York's Bowery district when I was a child in the 1950s, and the beggars on the subways wearing chestfuls of medals on their tattered clothing. By the early to mid-1960s, these guys were all dead. The VA system, which sucks big moose meat on a good day, was totally inadequate to take care of these folks, or even come close to meeting their needs. And the old soldiers' homes, which used to be had, were all being closed down as all the last of the Civil War and Spanish-American War vets were passing on. The only troopers with PTSD who do well are those who still have their faith, which is really easy to lose once you've seen what war does to human flesh. Those who had strong faith, no matter what, got back to having reasonably productive and happy lives despite their depression, despite their sadness, despite their dysfunctions. Those who did not have faith set into the deep depression and self-destructiveness. The key seems to have been a belief in a loving, caring, personal God from childhood to fall back on when the poop hits the fan. Those who adopt God on the battlefield usually drop the belief once they get back home because a faith has not been ingrained since their early programming. So the long and the short of it is to keep the faith in those who have it and establishing it firmly in those who don't is by far, so far, the best treatment for PTSD that has yet been developed. The support of fellows who have seen the elephant is also very strong and sheltering, so your idea for a veterans church is great. All combat vets come back with some degree of PTSD, and it affects the psychology of themselves and their families. This is one of the reasons why combat vets so often look down on the rear area Remington Raider types, or in the current verbiage, POGs, POGs, positions other than grunt. Those guys who haven't seen the elephant. Those who are actually up front in a war are far different in their post-combat psych makeup from those who were support troops. Having the 1,000-yard stare, I recognize it in folks who've been there. One psychologist told me that post-traumatic stress disorder was like the biblical curse, lasting for 7 generations. He developed that thesis from watching PTSD grow in the families of individuals who had survived the anti-Jewish pogroms in Russia and the Holocaust of World War II. So what we do with our patients who have PTSD will affect many people in their families and in everyone they touch for many, many, many decades to come.